you, Chair. Minister, I've got a couple of questions, but I just thought I'd come back to, if you don't mind, the escaping violence payment. I just wanted to clarify a couple of things, and I appreciate that you've acknowledged two stories today about two particular women, and were they in the West Australian newspaper, is that right? Well, I genuinely hope they haven't been put there today for political purposes rather than it being addressed earlier. But I did note that Ms Hefren-Webb mentioned that there have been over 6,000 applicants and applications for this. I really hope that women aren't somehow frightened or concerned that these two examples would deter them from applying for this payment. So can perhaps the department detail some of the positive feedback that you've got and the experiences that some of those 6,000 women have had?
Look, I mean, I can just give you a brief overview on that, Senator. I mean, look, there have been some really heartwarming communications that have come to my office from women who have been able to access this payment and have, it has been a really life-changing experience for them and overwhelmingly positive. I mean, I'd love to read some of them out, but obviously I don't want to identify anybody in this. But, somebody just saying, the fact that they actually walked in the front door and they felt that they were safe and that they couldn't have the things that they had been able to get access through either the payment or through the no interest loan scheme or, other support services that have been provided to them, that they felt for the first time in their life to be safe, that their children were safe. But, to your point, the idea that somebody would read the story in the West Australian this morning and think that that was the experience of everyone, I think would be very, very damaging because, clearly, we acknowledge that there's examples, they're not acceptable, but we don't want to deter women from coming forward and getting access to this payment, because if it's going to make the difference for them leaving a violent relationship, then that's the purpose of doing it. So, I want to make sure that every person who uses this particular program has a good experience, like some of the communications that my office has received, and I'll let the department respond in terms of anything that they've received. But the fact that over the last 17 weeks, more than $2 million has gone out the door to women escaping violence. That's well in excess of $100,000 a week. Now, of course, we want to make sure that the amount that goes out the door is meeting the demand that's out there for the payment. But I'm absolutely committed to fixing any problems that arise, taking all feedback from anyone, and so because I just so want every woman in Australia who finds herself in a violent situation to be able to have the support that she needs to be able to escape that violent situation. But I don't know whether Ms Hefren-Webb or Mr Bennett have got any more detailed information.
Just to add on to that, perhaps just for clarity for women that might have read that story or listening, I'm sure there's thousands of people out there listening to Senate estimates on their radio. But if perhaps you can outline what some of the experiences, some of the supports, that women are given during the application process and how are they supported through that, and particularly keeping in mind, or if you can update us, if this is the first time that they've tried to connect with a service or connect with a payment, how they're supported through that.
I can perhaps provide a couple of examples, Senator. A de-identified, of course, a culturally and linguistically diverse woman with her children contacted Escaping Violence Payment Program. The family was experiencing severe physical and mental abuse. The perpetrator had cut the family off from any supports or friends and family, resulting in the woman and her children being isolated from their culture while their lives were being continually threatened. The Escaping Violence Program worked in conjunction with a DV service to relocate the women and her children where the local community was ready to integrate the family into their community. The EVP assisted with the removal costs and with immediate food assistance. Another case, a client's recently moved to a new private rental with her children. She had spent all her money on rent and bond and had no money for food and her children's needs. Her ex-partner had breached the intervention order recently and found out where she's living. The EVP was able to assist her with security devices such as a camera and a security door to enable the family to live safely, and as a mechanism to report any further breaches. The EVP program also provided the client with vouchers for groceries. The family has additional case management support through a family violence service. So that's the type of assistance that can be provided.
Okay. So coming back to what I wanted to talk about really before that was, and again, before domestic violence, one of the things that that's spent a lot of time been spent talking about throughout the community is actually prevention, is actually changing the culture around consent, respect, and how to best deal with those situations. And I personally think it goes both ways. It's not just towards women, it's both directions. But what are some of, we've obviously talked about Stop It at the Start briefly, but what are some of the investments that have been made in the prevention space so that we're not just there at the back end when the situations have occurred, but that we're hopefully changing the culture for the future?
You make I think it is the absolute salient point if we are actually going to end violence once and for all, and that all Australians live in a society that's free of violence. And that is about making sure that every Australian understands what they can do to be part of the solution. Because, up until reasonably recently, I think there was a view that it was something that happened over there. It wasn't, a mainstream problem within the Australian society. And that's why the Stop It at the Start campaign was so important, was a journey of changing people's attitudes, changing their understanding, and hopefully now providing them with the confidence and the tools that they need so that they can call out disrespectful behaviour. The old saying of the standard you walk past is the standard you accept, I think is something that we really do need to be drilling in to say, if you see, kids behaving in a way that is disrespectful, then you should actually go and have a conversation with them and sort of explain to them why their behaviour, really is unacceptable. Because, I've probably said it a million times, not all disrespectful behaviour ends in violence, but you can be absolutely assured that all violence starts with disrespect. So I think, making sure that we are providing Australians with the tools and the mechanisms and the understanding about how their behaviours impact on other people's behaviour. When you do something, you may not think about the impact that it might have on somebody else. I think if we do think about that and say, well, actually, that's going to be, particularly hurtful and disrespectful to somebody else, maybe you don't need to say it, maybe you don't need to do it. And so it is a long and slow process to change people's behaviours and attitudes, but it is so important that we continue to invest in the things that will change people's behaviour. And just last week, the education ministers from around Australia met in relation to the national curriculum, and one of the things that they agreed to was actually the teaching of consent as part of the national curriculum. And I want to give a shout out to Chanel Contis, who has been working really hard with us and with the education department and people around Australia to make sure that the consent item in the curriculum reflects what is needed. Her personal experiences have informed how that's been developed. So making sure that we are dealing with issues of consent, making sure that we are providing materials that are age appropriate to young people, so that they can understand as they grow up, what is the kind of behaviour that will lead to a society that's free of violence, and making sure they understand what not to do. But there's also another really big piece is around making sure that we are intervening as early as possible when you start seeing behaviours that potentially could escalate. Shout out to the Tasmanian government for a great program that they've got around making sure that for people who are on apprehended violence orders, using monitoring systems so that when the perpetrator gets within a certain distance of the victim, that police are alerted to that. It may be sometimes it's innocent, and you may just ring her and say, the perpetrator is actually entering the same shopping centre that you are, maybe do your shopping in a few hours' time, and it could be completely innocent. But then if we monitor him and he's seen to be immediately adjacent to the children's school or within the vicinity of the house where he's not supposed to be, and Tasmania are reporting, 80+% reduction in the number of apprehended violence orders that are being breached as a result of this. So there are some great programs like that. And another program that I'm very keen to continue to be working with the states and territories around keeping women safe in their home. If it is safe to do so, we are very keen for the woman and her children to remain in the home. Means that the kids have got their things around them, they've got access to their friends and their school, and by supporting them with the necessary devices and supports to keep them safe within their own home. Because, one of the things we need to make sure is that it is the perpetrator who is punished for the action and not the victim, which is often the case when they have to actually leave. So where it is safe to do so, very keen to work on ways that we can keep women and children in the home, and the perpetrator needs to move out. So there are lots of great programs, and at the moment we're working with the states and territories in the development of the action plans that will sit underneath the next national plan to end violence against women and children, to make sure that we're not just providing the response support, which is so terribly important, of course, as we were talking about the escaping violence payment, but making sure that those other elements of investment in prevention and early intervention, so that we actually can move towards that target that we have to have of ending violence against women and children in Australia, ending all forms of gender-based violence in Australia has to be our goal.
Yeah. So, have I still got time? I'm looking at the chair. Okay. Just quickly, you just mentioned the national plan. Maybe if you can just update, how it's recently come together. What were the consultation? What did it look like? Who was involved? Last year's women's economic budget statement, 3.4 billion, which it's significantly more than it's ever been spent, and committed to certainly the women's economic safety statement. Can you maybe sort of just run us just a little bit through some of the consultation, how it got there, who's been involved, and what sort of that sort of next national plan, the action plan looks like?
Sure. Well, the national plan, the draft national plan that was released earlier this year for comment was the culmination of over 18 months of extensive consultation, which included the Women's Safety Summit that was held last September. The process then culminated in a draft plan that was put through both our advisory council and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander specific advisory council in relation to making sure that the next national plan has got a really strong focus on providing solutions for ATSI women and girls in an appropriate way, designed by them, delivered by them for Australians, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So went through that process, then went to Women's Safety Ministers, which is the ministers responsible for family and domestic violence in all of the states and territories around Australia. They signed off on it at the end of last year, and we received the feedback from that final process, and that was the draft plan that was released earlier this year, which is due, that feedback and comment process is due to finish on the 25th of February, and then we'll collate any additional information and comments into the plan so that we can actually release the plan as soon as possible. Obviously, because it is a sort of a federation initiative, we then will seek for the states and territories to have it formally, the action plans that sit under it formally endorsed through their respective cabinet mechanisms, to make sure that we can actually move as quickly as possible to get those real and tangible options out on the ground and start delivering. But, we made the comment when in last year's budget, when we put the $1.1 billion of that $3.4 billion that you're referring to women's safety. We said it was a down payment on the next national plan, and we've been working very closely with the sector, with particularly hearing the voices of victim survivors about what they think are the things that are going to change the dial for them, what they would have liked to have seen, in place, when they were victims. Working with the states and territories, working across government. This is not just a social services portfolio issue. It's very much making sure that we're integrating with, Attorney General for the court system, working with,
the housing superannuation,
the e-safety commissioner, all sorts of people. And one of the initiatives that we did announce early was that there clearly was a need for a coordination role, and that's why we announced early that we want to set up a specialist domestic violence commissioner and commission. We're dedicated with funding. $22.5 million has been allocated to the operation of that. It will be an independent authority that will have the ability to be able to make sure that we are all delivering on our commitments, and that we are coordinating, because as you know, there are so many different places where supports around this particular issue come into play, whether it be making sure the interface between what states and territories are doing and what the Commonwealth's doing, whether it be making sure that we are evaluating and the programs are working, actually delivering the results that we want, whether it be making sure that we're working across government. So it's been an amazing process with so many people that have been involved, and I'm really pleased that we are getting to the stage where we can actually get those action plans out, both the general action plan and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander action plan, so that we can get the initiatives moving alongside the the $1.1 billion that's already on foot and the actions that have been undertaken under that money.
Great, thank you. I'm sure I was getting the wind up there.
Senator